and welcome in. This is a unique episode. It's Thanksgiving week. It is the Vampire Fantasy Football Forum podcast. Go ahead, hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube if you're finding us out there. Also, follow us on Spotify as well, as we upload all our podcasts there on that platform. But like I said, it's a unique podcast this week. It is Thanksgiving week here in the United States. So we are doing a very condensed recording this week. So I have, as usual, for our forum roundtable podcast is Grant. He will be giving us some reactions from week 11, as we'll discuss that. We'll look at some waiver wire pickups as well. And all in one show. We give it all in one. We'll prepare for week 12 as we have 3 games coming out on Thursday versus our typical one. And then we'll also talk about the Sunday slate as well. So, Grant, welcome back in. It's a pleasure to have you on again and talking through fantasy and football.
Great. Love it. Excited to be here, Jeff.
Okay, so we all watched the week 11 games. Give me one quick reaction to what you saw from what happened in week 11, whether it's NFL topic or fantasy related topic.
I guess both. My quick reaction is Cowboys, Dallas Cowboys. I think you can start Tony Pollard and Zeke Elliott comfortably. And that's kind of like that's a take that involves both the Cowboys doing well against the Vikings, which I did not expect. I thought the Vikings would give them a lot more problems, just the way that Kirk Cousins has been throwing the ball recently. I didn't think Micah Parsons was going to be a big of a problem, and he got, 2 sacks Sunday. So that's kind of a two-sided thing with fantasy is I think Dallas running backs look really good right now, and if you got Pollard on the bench kind of as a handcuff for Zeke, I think you can pretty much at this point start Pollard going forward. And overall, the Dallas offense is looking really good.
Yeah. I think Pollard has moved out of the category of handcuff at this point in time to straight up, whether he's a flex option, depending on how deep the league is, or running back 2 with that running back 1 upside. Even with Zeke there, Zeke got the 2 touchdowns rushing. So if you're rostering Zeke in your fantasy lineups, then you're happy to see him get the 2 touchdowns rushing, but then Pollard gets the 2 receiving touchdowns. So, I think it's good. Yeah, Dallas is a really good offense, and I think I've spoke on this earlier where some of their issues on offense stems from how good their defense can be at times, where if the defense is playing really well, the offense doesn't have to necessarily produce as well. But I think we did see Sunday, the offense just surged while the defense surged as well. So it was good to see. I'm not typically a Cowboy fan, but seeing success for what they do. And I think the emergence of Pollard both helps and hurts the wide receiver core there, where it typically runs through CeeDee Lamb, but he was the most targeted wide receiver. But Pollard obviously had the big game. He had the 1 breakaway run with the touchdown. And so it's good to see. It's good to see that. It's good to see just there's a lot of competition in the NFC East. And everybody thought that was going to be the division last year, and that really didn't come to fruition. But we're seeing it now. So it's exciting for football. It's exciting for fantasy all around, where Philadelphia is – they held on Sunday, real close, but they held on. And so Dallas is still within the arm's reach of that division. So, yeah, exciting. Love that take. One thing I'll have as a takeaway from Sunday's games that I saw, I'm gonna go to the Chiefs, and it's a low hanging fruit here to go just to Kansas City, but it's gonna be both with Kansas City and the Chargers. One, Justin Herbert's not dead. He has underperformed this year, definitely underperformed. But with getting Keenan Allen back, Mike Williams rolled his ankle, so he has a high ankle sprain, and that's very unfortunate because now he'll be day to day or week to week, and especially this time of the year, that's not good. But even without Mike Williams, we saw that Chargers offense come to life, and that was really behind Herbert, Eckler, and Allen were the main three. And I think going forward, that offense is going to take a step forward, just with what they have there. That, and then you have to give Kansas City credit. This is a more of a football take, but it also has fantasy implications where so much change in that organization as far as they lost Hill, but they had what remained there as the core with Mahomes and Andy Reid and even Travis Kelce coming through just big once again and really separating himself this year at the tight end position. But that division was up in chaos over the summer where the Chiefs were down with the loss of Hill, and all of the teams around them just seemed to take a step forward. But Kansas City still has a stranglehold on the AFC West, and they lead that division by 3 games. So they're about ready to wrap up another division title. So I think that's my biggest takeaway still is that surprise of just how dominant Kansas City's been in the AFC West again this year.
Yeah, I think Brand goes to good points, and I would argue that almost all quarterbacks in this league, if they had the type of turnover the Chiefs have had at receiver position, I mean, just look at like Hardman has abdomen slash illness issues, goes on IR, right? Um, you got all this turnover, like MVS comes in. You have all these different receivers that have like come in, gotten used to the offense. Mahomes is throwing to what 7, 8 guys a game. It feels like every week,
Yeah,
and there's always different guy who's coming up making a play. So if it's 3 weeks ago with the 49ers game where Hardman's getting these shovel passes on jet sweeps, if it's Kelsey just taking the game over like it was last week, if it's MVS or someone else just doing a really good job of getting these chunk plays the week before that. Like I feel like that the Mahomes and the Chiefs have found a way to have a plug and play receiver, which is not common through either college or NFL. Usually you lose a couple of your receivers. Look at the Chargers, for example.
yeah,
I understand that it's when you have Pro Bowlers like Keenan Allen, Mike Williams that go out. Obviously, you're losing some depth there, but the Chargers haven't been able to replace that with other plug and play pieces, and the
right.
Chiefs have. And I
Yeah,
think that's the biggest difference that you can see between why the Chiefs are doing so well is I mean, the Chiefs could easily, if they couldn't, if you didn't have reliable receivers, the Chiefs could easily have dropped 2 or 3 more games,
yep,
and they could be neck and neck with the Chargers for the division. But instead, they've won those games because of Mahomes having the chemistry with these pieces that have just kind of come in and fit the system. And so, kind of to your point, it's been impressive that we've had a receiver like the Chiefs had receiver issues. Doesn't matter. They're able to take that still win football games.
yeah. I think it's the move for Kadarius Toney. It's a good move. It's not the replacement of Tyreek Hill, in my opinion, but
Mm-hmm.
that still gets talked about. I think of he's the replacement of Tyreek Hill, but to your point, Kansas Patrick Mahomes has thrown I think a touchdown. I think was the stat I saw. He's thrown a touchdown, and I could be wrong on that, but I believe it's to 10 different players. So whether that's running
Wow.
back, tight end, wide receivers, and I think that leads the NFL. So for fantasy purposes, what that really it's tough because he's throwing to 10 different guys as far as like any one of those guys could get a
Mm-hmm.
touchdown, but so it's very frustrating. I'm like, oh, do I pick the right guy? And I think over the course of the year, we've seen the consolidation of targets to Travis Kelce, and then Juju has stepped up to become that number 1 wide receiver, but really that number 2 option where how that offense runs, it goes through those two first with MVS being able to take off the top, but then now they had Hardman as that gadget guy and bringing in Kadarius Toney as it's that replacement where he can take off the top just like MVS can, but he also plays that gadget role where he could do things similar to Hill, but it's in a different way where you're not replacing that player, you're just doing it differently. Um, but it spreads the field out more to where if a team goes too high where they're going to play zone, we have the players to go put in the zone versus if we have man, well, we have some guys that have speed that we can beat man coverage as well. That and I think the assurgent, the ascendance, I should say, of Isaiah Pacheco and being able to just be a different type of running back than what they've had. I think they brought in Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He had that great season at LSU. They're hoping for big high things for him, and didn't work out that way. And hopefully, he's able to find something after this where it doesn't look like he'll end up staying with the team after this year, but hopefully he's able to find something. But they have something better now with the mix of Pacheco and then even Jerick McKinnon, where McKinnon brings a lot of that veteran status where if you watch it on fields, he's in there in the third down situation, he's in there in pass catching roles, he's in there in hurry up offense because he is that veteran that he understands pass protection. He understands what needs to happen a little bit better than a rookie does. And you want to see Pacheco be able to get that role, but that's just something that takes time. So I think as a whole, it's a better offense, and I think they're showing why they are that better offense still. So it's just fun to watch, though, every week.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. It's a lot of fun.
So, okay, moving off of just kind of high overall reactions from the game. We don't like to do point chasing here as far as what we do for waiver wire. Now, there's a little bit of that goes on, but as you think about waiver wire, whether you're, deep league, not deep league, who are some guys that kind of pop out to you if you've been looking at it of who should I go after this week, and what's kind of your thought process of just throw out a guy and just kind of why would this be a guy, whether it's I'm a team, fighting for a playoff spot in my fantasy football playoffs. I'm a team that has already have a solidified spot that I need depth for that, end of season push, or, what's kind of your thought process there? And, will you be one or the other or just somewhere in between there?
Mm-hmm. I think someone that you can pursue this week is Latavius Murray, mainly because Melvin Gordon, as everyone's probably well aware, had that pretty epic fumble into the first half of the Raiders Broncos game where they had first and goal from the 1 or the 2. Melvin Gordon fumbles. All of a sudden, it's they're 10, 15 yards back from the goal line. McManus has a field goal. They end up missing it. Crosby gets a hand on it, right, and then they miss it, and things just kind of start unraveling for the Broncos at that point. And so Gordon, has one of the highest. Melvin Gordon gets cut, and I think that because the Denver offense has been so bad, people have kind of slept on, other than the receivers like Judy or maybe Cortland Sutton, who hasn't performed this year. But other than the receivers, people have slept on the Denver offense. I think now could be good opportunities if you're desperate, looking for a flex option, maybe a little bit of a flyer. Latavius Murray is available. He's going to get more touches. Behind Latavius Murray, you've got good old Frank Gore, who I feel like is 65 at this point, still playing the league, but he hasn't got any touches this year, right? And he's second on the depth chart behind Latavius Murray. So I think it's a good opportunity to pick up someone, especially if you need some depth at running back and kind of flesh out your team. I mean, could be a solid flex play, especially with the Denver offense the way it is.
Yeah, is it Frank Gore really on the Denver offense?
I think it's Frank Gore. I think.
Is it? Well,
I think so. I'm
look that up. So Latavius Murray, for those that are listening, he is rostered, and if you're hearing this Wednesday and waivers ran and you didn't pick him up, there's information there that Grant, you brought up some good points where they waived.
Sorry, it's not Frank Gore. It's Marlon Mack. I'm sorry.
Marlon Mack.
It's Marlon Mack, not Frank Gore. Sorry.
Yeah. But it's still a good point of Marlon Mack. he's not really touched the ball this year, backing up. Now, Marlon Mack could be kind of a speculative ad for deeper leagues, um, where he's not going to be as rostered. He's rostered in 1.6% of ESPN leagues, so he is out there in almost every league. Um, but he's the guy where if Mike Boone isn't able to come back off IR right away, he's that backup. Chase Edmonds has ankle injury as well, so he will be out with then the waiving of Melvin Gordon. That brings this backfield to just the two back depth until Mike Boone returns. So Mike Boone's also that speculative ad of I need depth. They went to Boone early in the season as well. So he would be a good backup that would supplant Marlon Mack. So Mack could be a good 1 week. Let's see what happens. But to your point of Latavius Murray, he's rostered in 34% of ESPN leagues right now. So you want volume. Like we chase volume a little bit. I mean, volume is one of the things that helps drive production for fantasy football. So Denver likes to run. Latavius Murray is the lead back. Makes sense that he is the guy that gets the bulk of it. So he has opportunity. Let's see. This week, Denver faces off against. We'll kind of get on this a little bit, but who do they face off against? If I can find out my list. They
Carolina,
play the
I believe,
Panthers
right?
this week. So it's going to be not the best game because the Panthers have a pretty good defense. But again, you need a running back. There's a lot worse out there. So I like that call. So for those that maybe in a little deeper leagues, I would say somebody to kind of look at. Kind of depends on what you need, but I would say if you're looking for running back depth, and I think this is a good spot here too, James Cook for Buffalo is a pretty good ad. The one stat I will point out from the Cleveland game that Cook had, I think, the second amount of touches. He had 11 carries in that game. And so I think he either tied or was right there with Devin Singletary for touches. And the thought originally that I even had was when the team signed Naheem Hines that, Hines is going to supplant Cook this year because the rookie's not getting it done. He's just not there. But it's more and more appearing that Hines is more of a depth ad at this point in time for Buffalo, where James Cook is being brought in, and this is his second game this year where he's had 11 carries. The first game was with Tennessee, and that game with Tennessee, Buffalo's really blowing them out. So it's really, let's give this guy reps. Let's, do what, see what he can do. Didn't really do a whole lot, but Tennessee's also a very good run defense as well, as we've seen. The Cleveland game, though, that was a close game for a lot of that game. It wasn't until the late third quarter that they started pulling away. And James Cook was out there getting reps. So he's out there carrying the ball. He's taking some of the workload off Devin Singletary. So this is a guy where he's on a good offense. So it's a high volume offense. He's getting more opportunity. He's going to get more run with what he's able to do. Could provide production this week because they get Detroit this week, which that's a good spot to play. So if you're in, there's no buys this week, but if you're in a kind of a, you had one of your players go out with injury or you're just not sure about some of them, then this is a guy that I think that he's worth a shot. He's also worth a shot for depth for playoffs. So if you want to make a playoff push, you need depth at running back. It's kind of a under the radar ad. He is rostered in 20% of ESPN leagues right now. So most leagues, you're able to go pick him up. So that would be kind of running back I would look at adding. You have a wide receiver in mind that you might look at adding, whether it's for this week or for preparing for playoffs?
I really like Traylon Burks, Tennessee. rookie. He came on Sunday not Sunday, Thursday. Apologies there. Had 7 receptions, I believe, for 111 yards. Really had a good connection with Tannehill. I think with Tannehill kind of back to being healthy, he led all pass catchers. I think he's got a lot of upside going forward just because um, he's got the connection with Tannehill. If you kind of look at his previous stats, he was kind of in the 5 to 6, 7 point range. Had a few games where he had some donuts there on like in the kind of middle. I think weeks 6, 7, and 8. But the last few games, like he kind of took off during Green Bay. I think with Tannehill as the Derrick Henry train does its late season push as it always does, that helps
Right.
open the offense up, especially for Tannehill to kind of sell that play action. And with Burks, I think he has that ability to be again the late season flyer, flex spot where, hey, I don't have somebody super solid, kind of like almost like a Taysom Hill at tight end, right? He'd give you 2 points, you could get 30 from him. You don't know. So I think
Right.
that Burks could be that receiver that you play and could get him for cheap. I think he is not rostered. I think he's rostered in something. I think it's like 40% ish in leagues and started in
Yeah.
like 10. I think something like that.
So on ESPN, he is rostered in 22% of leagues right now. So
Okay,
this is
22%.
ESPN.
I
So
misspoke there. Okay.
sleeper, and Yahoo leagues may be slightly different, but if I'm reading,
Okay.
I'm going off ESPN leagues just because that's what I have up right now.
Yeah.
So
Perfect. Okay. Yeah. So I think he's an option there where you could pick him up. I think that, Robert Woods hasn't quite shown the dominant wide receiver one we were kind of hoping for, and probably what he got drafted um, preseason. And so I think Burks could be that new guy that kind of takes that role from Woods, and going forward could be that main guy.
yeah. So what's interesting about Traylon Burks? So they played Green Bay this last week, and the week before Green Bay played Dallas, and Christian Watson exploded for 3 touchdowns in the Dallas game, and then Christian Watson also scored 2 touchdowns on 4 targets against Tennessee, and in that game. And so what I liked about your Traylon Burks call of adding him is he had a 30% target share for Tennessee in the Green Bay game.
Mm.
So that's off 7 targets. Now he didn't score a touchdown, so he didn't really, big boom in his production, but 7 targets for 111 yards against Green Bay. Weeks 5 through 9, he was injured, so he was out for those games. So he
Mm.
really, weeks 1 through 4, didn't really do a whole lot. He had 3 catches, 4 catches, 1 catch, 2 catches, and then after getting back, they faced Denver. Denver's a really good defense. He has 3 catches, and then Green Bay, where he has 7 catches, and his target share then gets up to 30%. One of the things as you look at wide receivers, you look at target shares, take that into kind of the consideration where a target share for one team is not going to be necessarily look as equal, because if the team's more run heavy, which Tennessee is more run heavy than they are pass heavy, but when you look at the percentages of what percentage each receiver gets, a good to great, actually a great to elite wide receiver gets anywhere from 25 to 30% target share, where
Mm.
good to great kind of gets that 20-ish, 25. And then as you're kind of going down to like the averages, will get anywhere from maybe 10, 12, may hit the 15% mark. But what I like about the Traylon Burks call is if that 30% even goes down to 25%, that's still a very good, chunk of work and opportunity to get as far as what his potential is. And I think that is more sustainable versus some of that Christian Watson, where, we love seeing it. It's a dynamic player. It's good. And I like Watson. This is not an anti-Watson take. This is that production of touchdowns is not as sustainable as is the reception side of
Mm-hmm.
it. And the receptions plus the yards eventually equals touchdowns. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one thing I like. He's again being out there in 20% of leagues. He may not be out there in some of the deeper leagues, but typically, he's going to be out there in most leagues. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah. So
So next one
anything
for
to add?
you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think for if you move off of the Burks pick, I've got a question for you. So we've got
Okay.
Deshaun Watson, right, coming back week 13. He's practicing this week.
Yep.
I think, and anticipation of him coming back. Let's talk Browns for a second. So, do
Okay.
you see maybe a couple quick good waiver ads, Browns players, or maybe players you want to trade for that are on the Browns that you can see? Okay, Watson's coming back. The Browns are not great this year. They're going to be behind.
Right.
Probably not going to make the playoffs unless something crazy happens. So, what do you see as some players to pick up for like on a discount before Watson comes back and kind of amplifies their value?
Yeah. So on a discount, it's going to be hard with some of them because, like, I think now is the time to be trading for any Browns player. So
Mm-hmm.
Nick Chubb, he's going to have that pedigree of he's a first, second rounder. And he's had really good production. I think that only increases once Watson comes back, and even the team can be a little more pass heavy if they want to be. Amari Cooper has had that roller coaster of he's really, really hot. He's not doing so great. He's really hot again. He's not doing great. One thing to look at with Cooper is when defenses run zone versus man. Zone, he does really well against. Press man coverage, so like the Miami game, he doesn't do so well against. So the guy I actually really like in this offense that you could still probably get on the cheap as far as like not have to put a lot of assets out there. He's been getting better and he's been productive with Jacoby Brissett. He's also the deep ball guy in this offense, and that's Donovan Peoples Jones. Um, I've been talking about him for several weeks now. He
Mm-hmm.
finally found the end zone this week. This is his last week against the Bill, or yeah, it was against the Bills. That was the first time he found the end zone, and it didn't matter touchdown. So he finally had that where before that game he actually led the league in receiving yards without a touchdown. So he's getting the yards. He has the receptions. His reception share has been increasing each week. That only gets better once Watson comes back, where he is that deep ball guy. We remember the games where Watson had Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks, or Will Fuller and DeAndre Hopkins. Like he had the
Mm-hmm.
guys there that you wanted both, and you understood that Will Fuller could have a two catch, 70-yard, no touchdown game. He also could have a four catch, 140-yard, and he's going to get you two touchdowns. So he has that high ceiling. And I'm not saying Donovan Peoples Jones not the speedster that Will Fuller was, but he's better with his hands. He's more consistent. His value is going to go up. If there are teams out there, if there are leagues out there that both those guys are already picked up, because I know I'm not the only one talking about Donovan Peoples Jones. David Bell is actually the under the radar, very, very speculative ad. This is a rookie this year that has not seen a lot of target share, not seen high volume. He's not seen a lot of that yet, but he is actually faster than Donovan Peoples Jones. So he could potentially take that down the field role from Jones when Watson comes back. So that's a very, very high speculative ad where that should only be in the deepest of leagues, I think, where he should be added. So,
Gotcha.
yeah.
How do you feel about Kareem Hunt? Or if you're an owner who has Kareem Hunt, if you are someone who wants to get a part of the Browns offense, how do you how do you treat Kareem Hunt? Do you see him as becoming kind of like a diet Le'Veon Bell with Watson? Do you see him kind of being like sort of like the Tony Pollard Zeke situation with the Cowboys right now, where they kind of both become startable with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt? Like, how would you treat Kareem Hunt once Watson comes back?
Yeah, I think it's more on the lines of like Pollard and Zeke, where they're both
Okay.
startable because they're both even startable now.
Mm-hmm.
Hunt is more versus like Pollard. Pollard is that RB2, almost solidifying that, but that's been this past few weeks that we're really seeing that. But I think Hunt gets to that flex to RB2 talk, and especially with Watson coming back, Hunt's the main pass catcher out of that backfield, where Chubb is typically used in the, you know, grind it through the ground. I'm not, doesn't really catch as many passes. I'm not saying he can't, but typically he does not. That's the biggest
Mm-hmm.
knock on Chubb in PPR leagues is he doesn't catch a lot of passes, but he also proves us wrong that he doesn't need to catch passes in order to have value. So I'd still try to acquire him, especially with Watson coming back. Some managers that have these players on their rosters, they probably know the implications of, well, Watson's coming back. Um, so honestly, the this week against Tampa Bay, right before Tampa Bay, is probably the best time to make the argument to do that because Tampa Bay has a good run defense. So you can kind of see that, hey, they might struggle against Tampa Bay here because after that, when Watson does come back, they get Houston. And Houston, I think, ranks dead last against the running back position. So that's an opportunity there where the value is just going to skyrocket after that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't have a bad schedule the rest of the way for that either. So I'd still try to acquire him, see how inexpensive it is. Don't overpay by any means. And I honestly couldn't tell you what I think that is off the top of my head because I don't know. It really depends on your situation and what your team makeup is as well. But so let's see here. So other than on the Browns, like I like Donovan Peoples Jones. Um, there was a guy. So there are a few kind of ads that I'm looking at. Some are speculative. Some are this week. I think going back, I'm gonna go back to Kansas City here real quick too. Both Sky Moore and Justin Watson, I think, are potentially streamable this week. Kadarius Toney had a hamstring injury pop up against the Chargers, so we do hope he's
Mm-hmm.
back. But Juju Smith-Schuster is also still trying to get through concussion protocol, so he missed the Chargers game, and so we hope he doesn't miss this game. But just in case, uh, I'm looking at both Watson and Sky Moore for different reasons. I think Justin Watson, he runs more of that Juju Smith Schuster route tree where he's going to take the underneath. He's going to take those short yardage situations that Kelsey doesn't get, that Juju typically runs. He only caught 3 targets on 4 targets for against the Chargers, but he also has 67 yards. So he had a high depth of
Mm-hmm.
target, in his average. So while it doesn't look like he did a
Mm-hmm.
lot, I actually think there's still opportunity for him to do more because he saw his highest target game against Tennessee at 5,
Mm-hmm.
where Juju's out, especially if Tony's out. That does increase that, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like Watson too. I agree with you because he played on 88% of the Chiefs snaps
Yep.
last game versus the Chargers, which is kind of like what you mentioned. It's the target share for the receivers. Another indication is offensive snaps. So he, even if he's not out there, the targets are gonna get there as he becomes more of a focal piece of the offense. Mahomes, as we've seen this year, has done really well with kind of more the short yardage versus the Tyreek bombs. It's kind of been more the bread and butter. The receivers have made one guy miss. A 5 yard gain becomes 15. So I think Watson's that kind of player, and I think the 88% target share, the 88% him being on the field for 88% of the offensive snaps is a good tell that he'll be a part of that offense going forward.
Yeah. And I I say him over Sky Moore for one reason of he's not a rookie and Sky Moore is. Sky Moore had a very productive game against the Chargers where he saw 6 targets and he got 5 of them for 63 yards. So that's still a very productive, very encouraging thing. I lean Watson just because he runs the Juju route tree more so. Sky Moore can run that, but he also may run more the Tony route tree as well, or he may be used in a way Hardman's used. So I think that's a little more up and down with what his production might be. And this is speculative, of course, but I think there's opportunity with both. I like Watson a little bit more. One player, and I want to get your take on this because this can be kind of polarizing here. So Detroit has a wide receiver coming back soon. He's been designated to come back. They're not necessarily saying it's going to be this week, but it could be next week. Jameson Williams is coming off IR and designated to come back. Probably not against Buffalo, but looks like it'll be the next week, which is against Jacksonville. What are your thoughts on adding Jameson Williams? Not now, not for production now, but for the playoffs.
So what I do like about adding Williams is that the Lions have been battling wide receiver issues for several weeks now.
Yep.
I feel like he can come in, fill that void. Goff is a good enough quarterback. Keep in mind, for fantasy, typically, he's been great. I'd say you could argue the whole difference between real football and fantasy, same that, you could already get a difference. But in terms of fantasy, he typically has been on teams with not a great defense. He's had a high volume. He makes mistakes, which means he's throwing the ball. He's typically been behind. He's throwing the ball. So to me, having a receiver that can come in and return, especially he's supposed to come back for the game versus the Bills on Thursday. I think that with him being a rookie, he had a lot of potential coming out of the draft. Both NFL combine draft and also even in fantasy leagues. There was some talk about him before he got injured. I think it's a good play. I mean, especially too if your extra bench spot is rostering some handcuff that you think is not going to pay off at this point. I think it's a very high upside pickup in kind of a no lose situation. And also too, I mean, to be sneaky, it depends on your league, but a lot of the leagues treat IR spots as also you can put pup players in there. So if you grab him before Thursday, his designation doesn't turn off, you could probably stick him in your IR spot, keep him there, don't touch your lineup, see what happens, what things shake out on Friday, Saturday, Sunday after the game. So you can always keep him in your IR spot. He plays the Bills, maybe he doesn't pan out, you want to move some pieces around, or you keep him there, and then you kind of move your roster around and free up the space to put him on your normal bench.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it's a kind of a sneaky ad for fantasy playoffs. So starting in week 15, and maybe it's even week 14. Some fantasy playoffs may happen week 14, but week 14, Detroit gets Minnesota. That's a favorable matchup for wide receivers. Then they get the Jets. Now, that's a little bit tougher one, but I actually think Detroit as an offense is at least on the same level, if not a little bit more so than what the Patriots offense is. Jared Goff is, I think, a little bit better than Mac Jones. Personal opinion, so I could be wrong. But then week 16, they get Carolina. So that's also another tougher defense, under the radar tougher defense. But then championship week, they get Chicago. And that's a good matchup. So you may be looking at this as, well, I can play him potentially in 2 out of the 4 weeks, potentially, however many weeks a playoff is for certain leagues. But, to your point, you add him now, if he actually is producing, one of the things I think we have to always remind ourselves each year is if you have a stud and you had have a guy that you just know he's going to produce, you're going to want to play him even in a tough matchup, knowing he might have a lower ceiling where you still want to play those guys. And we don't know what Jameson Williams is. He may not quite do as much this year, but I think it's worth a shot because the pedigree that you talked
Mm-hmm.
about from him coming out of Alabama, he's a first round draft pick. He was highly rated, so I think it's worth an
Mm-hmm.
ad.
Yeah,
Definitely worth
definitely. I think
having.
too is at this point, if you're in the playoffs, your team's good. I think you start your studs, but at the same time, injuries can happen. It's a long
Right.
season. Anything can happen. Look at Cooper Cup. Look at some of these guys that were, I mean, shoe-ins that were, surefire wide receiver ones across the board. You need to have a backup plan, and I think having players like Williams that can fill that void, I think you definitely want to have people like that on your bench where someone goes down, you can put someone in, and you're not kind of kind of put yourself in a corner where all of a sudden like I have this void and you're picking up some random guy on Sunday morning in your playoff matchup. You want to have some guy where you kind of thought about it. You have some upside. There's a potential volume. The metrics are there to say that like at least the ceiling could be high. The floor also could be zero, but the ceiling's high to where it can help you win your matchup.
Right. Absolutely. All right. We'll get off waiver wire here. As we kind of prepare for fantasy playoffs too, let's say you're a team that whether you're fighting to get in and you're trying to add depth and that you have some good players to add production, or you already solidified that you're adding depth. We just kind of touched on this with Jameson Williams, but is there a guy that, you know, trade deadlines either have passed or they may be passing this next week? Is there a guy if a trade deadline's still out there and hasn't come yet? Is there a guy you're trying to trade for or you would like to trade for to prepare your team for the playoff push?
I think you really want to focus if you've got a good team and you have surefire starters, studs. Example like Joe Mixon, right?
Right.
I think this is a really good time to get Samaje Perine and start transitioning. Like I said, you have the Williams pick where it's a speculative high ceiling pick, but at the same time, you kind of need to start focusing, at least my opinion, focusing your bench from more of the hey, these are 7, 8, 9 point guys to more handcuffs to your starters because you're going to start your studs. There's no more buys. You are going to play your Josh Jacobs. You're going to play your Joe Mixons. You're going to play, your Pat Mahomeses, etc. Right? So you kind of have to
Right.
start looking at like, okay, you have your lineup, you have your players. If those main players get injured, who's the most likely person on that team to step up so you don't have to scrounge and panic on Tuesday night to pick people up? So
Right.
I like looking at handcuffs. P. Ryan is obviously he had his crazy day. And what he caught 3 touchdown passes right on Sunday, which
Yeah.
is absolutely insane. So people probably a little more interested in him this week than they in previous weeks, but I think it's worth an ad to kind of solidify your lineup because especially with running backs, I mean injuries can happen all the time.
Sure. Well, and P Ryan happened because I think Mixon tweaked a hammy on Sunday, and
I think
so
so. Yep.
for this week, P Ryan's really good ad if he's on waivers, but also then to your point, adding handcuffs. So if you're looking at if it's Joe Mixon, there are some backfields where it's a little clearer who the who the handcuff is. So like Pittsburgh has Najee Harris and the handcuffs Jalen Warren, and P Ryan's obviously for Mixon. Popular one out there that may not be on waiver wires, but if it is, if you're a Fournette owner, you should have already been stashing Rashad White.
hmm
But if White's out there, you should already go get him because coming out of the bye, he might lead that backfield. It's not a
hmm
definite. We haven't heard, but White might be the guy leading the backfield because Fournette did tweak his hip um, when they played in Germany 2 weeks ago. So we don't know. We don't have the news on that yet. Yeah, I think especially if you're a playoff team, you're pushing. You need to account for injuries, but if there's a handcuff out there that you don't have the starter, but you want the handcuff on your team, I think that's an absolutely viable strategy too, where if I'm not the Dalvin Cook owner, but I see Alexander Madison out there, I'm going to go pick him up because
Mhm.
if Cook gets hurt, I all of a sudden have the starter.
Mhm.
And so that makes him a lot more valuable. So there's definitely that out there where if you see a handcuff out there and you think, well, if something happens to this guy, um, then all of a sudden I have, the backfield. And each week's going to be a little bit different where we see that, play out a little bit more. I think like Pittsburgh situation for one, I think Najee kind of solidified that role a little bit. That was a little bit due to Jalen Warren did get injured. He tweaked his hamstring a little bit. So, but Harris did produce. So he's solidified himself a little bit more in that backfield where, yes, Jalen Warren is still worth a pickup and he's still worth rostering, but with the caveat of he may not see as much work because the starter in that situation is actually stepping up and taking over that backfield. Whereas, like in Tampa
Mhm.
Bay, Fournette hasn't really done that, and White has continually increased his role and continually increased the snaps he gets, the rush share he gets, and he actually has looked better than what Fournette has looked. So those could be two roles that look very similar, but the starters are doing different things. So therefore, the backups are going to do different things as well. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
so
I agree with you, and I guess in that same line of thought, when you have a playoff team, are you kind of looking for more of the speculative ads personally, or are you kind of trying to roster handcuffs for running backs? Because I feel like especially the R league that we're in a three receiver super flex. It's very receiver heavy, 1 point PPR. So are you? It depends on each league you're in, of course, but are you trying to go for handcuffs for the playoffs? Like, what's your strategy?
I think I'm trying to do a little bit of both. Um,
Okay.
and it obviously accounts for how deep is the league run as far as like how many bench spots do I have to work with. Um, I think if I'm in the scenario of I have a playoff team that I know I'm making the playoffs, I first want to start adding, and several weeks ago start doing this, but adding handcuffs first, where I want my handcuffs. Where you know, if I have Chubb, I can't really add the handcuff because that's Kareem Hunt. So I'm not really looking for that. But then maybe I'm able to add a Rashad White out of Tampa Bay because the owner of Fournette manager didn't pick him up. So I still will add a handcuff of just in case. Um, so I'm going to look at that first, but then also looking at speculative ads of okay, is there a guy that I think could maybe come out of nowhere, really come on to the last few weeks of the season, and then I can just plug him in. And if I have a guy that I'm not really comfortable with, because there are those out there where if you're rostering Cortland Sutton or you're even rostering like Michael Pittman or Deontay Johnson or somebody like that where their production's been low, you know,
Mm.
somebody else comes on like a Jameson Williams or somebody else where it's like, oh, an injury happened, or Marquise Brown comes back and he picks up where he left off before he got injured, where it's like, hey, could I go get a guy like that where he can elevate my team to that next level? If I don't have him already and I want to try to trade for, let's say, a wide receiver that could do that, if he's on your waiver wire, you should already roster him. He had a down week last week, but if I'm looking at playoff only, I'm going to look to trade for Garrett Wilson out of the Jets. And the reason why, I do think they make a quarterback change. I understand Zach Wilson has been atrocious the past few weeks,
Mhm.
but a quarterback can have a bad statistical game and a wide receiver still have a good statistical game. Um, so I think that's one thing to keep in mind. Yeah, Garrett Wilson didn't do much against New England, but in the playoffs, week 15, 16, and 17, the Jets face Detroit, Jacksonville, and Seattle. Those are very positive
Mm.
matchups for wide receivers. And we've seen the big boom week. It happened in week 2. He's also done well against New England in week 8. He had almost 18 points, or he had 6 catches for 115. And then against Buffalo, he also had 8 catches for 92. So he can do it against good competition. If the Jets make a switch to whether it's Joe Flacco again or Mike White, that only, I think, increases his value because he is taking over the lead of targets. He is that guy. So there's situations like that where I may be trying to sneak a guy on the cheap of like, hey, he's really not producing well. This is a bad team. Can I trade this bench asset for him to see what he does? Knowing that I may be trading away another bench asset that's a speculative ad as well, but I may feel better about the situation with the Jets as far as Garrett Wilson
Mm.
specifically versus the one I'm trading away. So,
Mm-hmm. And that makes sense. And in that same, I guess, same thought process, the Bears, right? Justin Fields has his injury. They're still being evaluated. I think they're not quite 100% sure the extent of what's going on. So, are you preparing for the fantasy playoffs and kind of this push for the last part of the season? Are you trading your Bears players or are you trading for them? Like what's your thought there?
so it's a good thought because my initial thought is I'm trading them away. And that would
Mm-hmm.
also include Fields. So the reason why is situation, and this is seasonal only. This isn't dynasty. Seasonal only, and I might be I might be wrong on this, and I'll own this if I'm wrong at the end of the year. But I think Fields is the guy that's going to get you to the playoffs, and that potentially then could drop off a bit. So reason why I say that is this week, if let's say all things equal, he's healthy, right? Let's say he's healthy, he's
Mm-hmm.
cleared, he's fine. He had an injury to his non-throwing shoulder, and we've seen other quarterbacks do fine. We've also seen it, maybe be affected by that. But this week they get the Jets. That's a very tough matchup against quarterbacks. I think they are top 7 against that position in fantasy. Next week, they get Green Bay. Green Bay is actually top 5 against quarterback position in fantasy football as well. Week 14, they're on bye. So if you start the playoffs in week 14,
Mm,
you can't use him. So he's not even available.
mm, good
And
point.
then
Yeah.
in the playoffs, he's got Philadelphia, which is another tough defense against quarterbacks, and Buffalo. Now, Buffalo is a tough matchup still because they've been injured. I think they're a tough matchup more in our minds of we think this is Buffalo defense. It's this high caliber. And I think they still have that potential. I'm not even going to say they can't be that. I'm just thinking that I don't think they're that lock of you can't start or expect a good game. I think they can give. It just depends on the situation. The championship week is where he's usable again, I think. And they face Detroit. So against Detroit, he had almost 40 points this last meeting. So I think he's a harder sell, or he's a harder person to roster through the playoffs because then if he's only usable in the championship week, you have to have a quarterback to get you there then. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where it becomes hard of I need somebody to get me there, and then I can use him. So if you're in a two QB league, he's obviously usable because if your first quarterback is, even if it's Kirk Cousins, that's still a good 1-2 quarterback duo. It still is that recognition of, oh, that floor of potentially, 15 points, 20 points, not these 25, 30, 40 point outings that he's had that's more the level he's probably going to produce at than not. So I would say you're trading away. The
Mm-hmm.
only really other guy that I'm not necessarily trading away, I'm also not trading for on the Bears, David Montgomery. So with Khalil Herbert going down on IR, this is now Montgomery's backfield. And Montgomery's not really the type of running back I typically try and draft or have on my fantasy teams. But again, it goes back to that comment we were talking about earlier of opportunity. So he has more of that workload. He has that backfield. We saw it this past week of he's got the opportunity now. So because he has opportunity, that equals the potential. It's like having Damian Pierce for Houston, where it's a tough road. It's going to be a tough road, but he's getting the opportunity. So he has that potential of being that RB2, that flex of you can use him. So I think those are two that are in similar situations where it's tough to just say, well, I'm going to trade him away because they have really good value potentially. And are you going to get that same fair value for that if you trade him away?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, good points. Good points. I think that's people can have knee-jerk reactions, and kind of what you mentioned. I think that I think people kind of forget the schedule because people say, "Oh, well, I've had this stud right, and he's had this flash in the pan," which is kind of what Fields has been, where he had a rough start to the first half of the season, but then he's been fired the last 4 or 5 weeks, right? And
right,
so people though do forget it's like, well, I week 14, week 15, if you're starting tough opponents, like you kind of have to do matchup situations, and like yes, there is start your studs, but at the same time, if you have two quarterbacks, right? If you're benching Kirk Cousins to play Justin Fields, you might look at what Kirk Cousins is playing that matchup and might
right.
play him because I mean you don't want as your quarterback to get 8 points in a fantasy matchup or a
Yeah,
playoff matchup.
yeah. No, and I mean, there is that element of, yes, start your studs. And Fields is a stud, but I think he's still young enough that he has growth
Mm-hmm.
opportunity where we have to be realistic too of, this isn't I'm starting Pat Mahomes where, oh, this is Pat Mahomes, why would I bench Pat Mahomes against the Bills? Well, you wouldn't do that. That's, nonsense, but you also had a higher draft capital. It has
Mm-hmm.
more opportunity cost of, if I don't play Mahomes, yeah, sure, Mahomes has a 15-point floor. I mean, most quarterbacks do, but if you're expecting that 40 point out of Fields when you should only be
Mm-hmm.
expecting 15 points, then
Exactly.
you're setting yourself up for a long week. So that would be all I would think.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, very
I
cool.
agree.
Grant, let's look at real quick, kind of go through the week here for week 12. We've got 3 games
Okay.
Thursday. So Thanksgiving, 3 games on Thursday. As usual, the Lions and Cowboys will each play. The Lions, as we've talked about, get Buffalo. Buffalo, I think, has stayed in Detroit with the weather game that was moved there last week. So they're probably already there. Um, you think about this game, what are your thoughts on this game?
So this game, I think it's going to be a high scoring game. As we're well aware, the Lions started off having a really good offense, not great defense. I think that trend kind of continues. Josh Allen's a stud. He's in a dome, which is nice, especially this time of year. And I think overall Jared Goff gets behind. Game script kind of turns ugly for the Lions. They start throwing the ball a lot. My opinion, I think it's a Bills, probably a 35-21, 28-17 type of game for the Bills when they win it.
Yeah, so I think this game has Buffalo as a 9.5 point favorite, and it's a high scoring game. We said it's a 54.5 for a total
Mm-hmm.
for the game. um, would you do you feel confident starting any Lions in this game? Let me ask you that.
I think if you have injuries, there's not any bye weeks this week, right? But I think if
Right.
you have some injuries, I think Jared Goff is not a bad streaming quarterback option. Like if you've got Kyler Murray, right, and he's still hurt
Right.
and you don't know what's going on with Colt McCoy, I think Jared Goff's a decent option. Um, I think for running backs, I mean, if you have Swift at this point, I think you're probably starting Swift, right?
Right.
But like you're kind of also stuck. You've been scratching your head about that for the last whole season. So I think you do that. You probably do start the Sun God just for
Yeah.
the game script and the volume. Other than that, like I don't really see a ton of options for the Lions. Um, Overall, I think those are the big three players that I do, and I'm not super confident on those. But if you kind of had them, you start them because you probably don't have a whole lot of other options.
Right. Would you start Jamal
Mm-hmm.
Williams?
Jamal Williams, man, it's tough. He just mooched a ton of touchdowns last week. You could argue that the Lions put him in a position on purpose to do that, which is just that's part of his job, and he came in to do some bruising and run stuff. I don't think his 3 touchdown career high explosion is sustainable. I think
Correct.
he might average one every other week. For me, I think again, if you're desperate, if you have him on your team, you could flex him and hope and pray for a mooch or two. But I'm probably not moving him into one of my 2 primary running back spots if I have other people. Again, if you're in the position where you started him last week and he scored well, you got to keep him there, right? But if he's on your bench and you're freaking out thinking that you're going to lose points again, I think you're lucky to see 10 points from him this week.
Yeah. So I actually agree with that, and that's actually a good take on not chasing the scoreboard. Where even if you used him last week, and he had a
Mm-hmm.
decently tough matchup last week against the Giants. So
Mm-hmm.
I think this is one where you're not chasing the points. Where it takes a lot for Detroit to get so close to the end zone that he has the opportunity to run it in 3 times. And even in that game, Swift had 1 carry into the end zone as well. That kind of salvaged his day for that game. Um, I'm probably, if I have Jared Goff, and I do have him, I have him in our league, and I have him in a few others, and I'm probably trending to start him because I'm trying to get myself out of that mode of, well, Buffalo's just stop all defense. They're going to stop everything. I don't think they're that way anymore, but it's still in the back of my head of this is a tougher matchup, so I don't feel super confident in it. Detroit has typically this year been bad as far as offensive production against teams that are able to rush the quarterback well. Um, and Buffalo can do that. They have a good pass rush. Against the running back position, Buffalo has seen an average of almost 20 attempts a game. They give up 84 yards on the ground with less than a touchdown per game on average. So, to your point of Jamal Williams having a potentially tough day, even Justin Jackson having a really tough day because he's kind of that backup to Jamal Williams, kind of almost supplanting Swift as Swift is getting healthy again. Um, I would agree. I think the only guy I actually feel comfortable necessarily, starting is Amon-Ra St. Brown, where he leads the
Mm-hmm.
team. He plays out of the slot. Buffalo can play a zone. He can find the openings where that's the only guy I'm really feeling comfortable saying, I'm going to roll this guy out. I'm going to be confident in it. I'd still start as well Swift, and I'd still start Goff as well. So on the
Mm-hmm.
Buffalo side, I don't think there's necessarily much to talk about. I mean, you're not sitting Josh Allen any week that he's
Mm-hmm.
healthy. You're not sitting Diggs. You're also not sitting necessarily Gabe Davis, especially in a very good matchup. Um, Singletary, James Cook. I mean, would you start both if you had the option? Like, not necessarily both on the same team, but if you have one or the other, you looking at both of them saying I can start them this week.
I'm thinking I'm starting Singletary. I think he's shown some flex potential, especially if you've been starting him. I think you're kind of expecting those numbers. He's done well. I mean, he's done double digit points the last 2 weeks,
Right.
and he has the potential to kind of sneak in. I mean, his floor is this like 7 to 8 range, so I do like Singletary for that kind of flex option because you've been treating him like that the whole season. Again, it's a situation where if he's your RB1, RB2, you spend a lot of draft capital on receivers early, or maybe a Travis Kelsey the first round or something like that, and you've got running back situation where Singletary is your running back too, then yeah, you're starting him regardless. So I think those, if you're thinking for flex, not the worst play in the world. I could definitely see Buffalo going up early, maybe a quick 14-0 lead. The Bills don't really take their foot off the gas, but maybe, dwindling minutes the third quarter, all of a sudden, Singletary, they start giving the ball to him. They're up by 21 or something. He starts kind of, controlling some of that and picks up, 40, 50 trash yards at some point in the fourth quarter and, has a 10-point game.
Right. No, I see that. It's good. Let's move on to Cowboys, and they face the Giants. And the Giants are
Mm-hmm.
coming off a loss to the Lions. So some would say it's a surprising loss, but this game is a 45.5 over under, and the Cowboys are a 9.5 point favorite on this one as well. Both these teams are actually tied for the division, or excuse me, they're tied for the second place in this division behind Philadelphia. These teams are both 7-3. My opinion, these are two different 7-3 teams, though. Where I think
Mm-hmm.
the Cowboys actually are a more legitimate 7-3 team. The Giants, while they're a great story, especially coming from what they had last year, I think they are a wonderful, 7-3 team to, for the record, but I could see them losing this game and kind of losing it big.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that we don't talk about defense a lot. If you have the Cowboys defense, I think it's a great game to play the
Sure.
Cowboys in, especially with Daniel Jones. He's been more consistent. He's been better, but I think not so much for turnovers per se, but I think just the Dallas pass rush, as we saw last week with the
Yep.
Vikings. I mean, they've been doing great with Dalvin Cook all season long with the Vikings, and the Cowboys just ran through them. It was
Yeah.
incredible. So I think if you're Dallas, you obviously have the running backs. I think you start both. If you have both, you start them both, Pollard, right?
Yep.
So I did it in one of my dynasty leagues. I'm starting both of them, right? Like I'm getting I'm getting 40 points. I need to look again. I think I got 45 points between the two Dallas running backs last
Oh
week. It was
man.
crazy. Um, yeah. So I think that you start them both. You start Dallas's defense. You know, I think you got Dak, you start him, and Dallas receivers, we mentioned a little bit earlier in the podcast, it's a little bit tougher, like the Michael Gallups, the CD Lambs. I think you start CD Lamb if he's a flex, but maybe what your thoughts are with this the emergence of Pollard is kind of this diet Le'Veon Bell. Like,
Right.
how are you viewing the Dallas receivers in this matchup?
Yeah. So for this one, I mean, the emergence of Pollard does kind of hurt pass catchers for him a little bit, but interesting fact, and this is prior to the week 11 weeks, but I don't think it drops off enough for this to matter with a little bit with 1 week old data. But CD Lamb has a 30% target share for Dallas. And I think he is, for total targets across the league, I think he's like 12th total. So that's,
Wow.
behind guys like Cooper Kupp, that's behind guys like Justin Jefferson. So that to me says, CD Lamb is, I'm really out there week in and week out. Do I see the dangers of having him, especially if he's, typically he's going to be somebody's number one wide receiver where they they didn't get the Jeffersons, they didn't get the Cups, they didn't get, that tier, but they said, I'm going to wait and I'm going to get maybe, they grabbed Jonathan Taylor at the 101 and came back or something like that and got Lamb in the second round or something. So I'm still rolling CeeDee Lamb out there. Gallup's the guy I think gets hurt more because he's more that stretch receiver. So I think you can, but he is definitely that flex where he is really looking for that big long play.
Mhm.
Lamb will get you there by volume, typically, where he could, if Pollard doesn't have the game he has, Lamb could totally turn around and just have 8-10 for whatever and a touchdown or two. He's done it before, and so I think this helps him. You're still rolling him out there. So that's kind of how I see it. Where because the target share is there, he's getting that 30% target share for the year. He's got that role locked up of like, I'm gonna get that production. It becomes a lot worse for the ancillary pieces of Gallup or anybody after him. The only other guy that I'd look at starting is Dalton Schultz, and that's only because the tight ends used kind of as that. It's that safety blanket. It's that middle of the field. I'm getting that short
Mhm.
stuff. He's got the opportunity. Plus, tight end in fantasy football is such a wasteland where if you've got one of the high
Mhm.
guys, then you may as well use them. And so it's a good offense. He's getting the production. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think he's getting outside the weeks he was injured. I think he has at least a 18% target share where that's not something that's saying, oh, I'll just go stream a guy. No, I'll go play Schultz and I'll be fine with it. So, but so that's kind of my view on that. So I'd start everybody that you were saying. I'd potentially sit
Mhm.
Gallup. Um, on the Giants side, I mean, we're obviously starting Saquon Barkley. We don't necessarily need to. Yeah, it's a tougher matchup, but he is getting the carries that he's getting. He's got the volume there. He's he's a generational guy, but
Mhm.
where it becomes interesting is quarterback and pass catchers. So Daniel Jones is he's not Josh Allen. He's not the high level guy, but he's definitely been a lot better this year than he has been in past years. The issue though comes down to the Giants pass catchers are all injured. I mean, the top
Mhm.
receiver right now is Darius Slayton. So,
Yep.
um,
Yep.
do you start with confidence any pass catchers for the Giants?
I think what you mentioned, Slayton's really the really good option because you've got behind him you got Kenny Galladay and then Isaiah Hodgins, and so I think the only thing you can really start with confidence is Slayton in that flex spot. He has scored double-digit points the last 2 weeks. I think that probably continues versus the Cowboys, not necessarily because the Cowboys defense is bad, but because Daniel Jones has literally no one else to throw to, and if I have had to guess, he's gonna be pressured. He's gonna be throwing the ball a lot. I think there's some opportunity there to pick up 8 to 12 points from Slayton. I think as a decent floor, I would think versus the
Sure.
Cowboys, just because they're gonna be zeroed in on Saquon, and it's a good flex play.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a good cause of flex play, and again, he's coming off potentially a waiver wire this week, so a waiver wire flex play right now
Mm-hmm.
if you need to be able to play somebody. So let's jump over to the
Mm-hmm.
last game for Thursday, and we'll do is the Vikings and the Patriots. This is a lower scoring game for the Thursday slate, and that's a 42.5 total, with the Vikings still as a 2.5 point favorite in this game.
Mm-hmm.
On the Patriots side, I mean, I would still actually say we saw what Dallas did. The Patriots, I would not say have as good of a defense, but they still have a good defense that can get pressure. So you're probably, if you're in a league that plays defense, going to go with the Patriots. I don't like Mac Jones here.
Yep,
I
I
don't
agree.
necessarily. I think if anything, he's a 2 QB league quarterback that you're kind of desperate. You're kind of searching for somebody. Um, I like Rondé Stevenson still. I mean, Damian Harris has been getting more work, so I think the ceiling kind of comes down a little bit for Stevenson. But he's solidified himself in this role. I feel like he's getting the carries and the receptions where he gets the majority of it. Where yes, Damian Harris has more flex appeal, but Stevenson still has that RB2 with RB1 upside. I still feel like. Um, Thoughts kind of on the backfield real quick before we jump over to. There's really only one pass catcher I like out of the Patriots. That's Jacoby Myers, and he's
Mm-hmm.
really volume dependent. And so this is again more like a Darius Slayton conversation where it's a flex play. But I think
Mm-hmm.
the more interesting thing about the Patriots is the backfield as well, where it's that Stevenson Harris. What do you kind of see out of that?
Yeah, I honestly, to be honest, this matchup, I don't like this matchup at all. I watched the Patriots and the Jets have this nasty 3-3 slugfest through most of the game last week, and so the Patriots offense is not in a good spot. Vikings offense is not in a good spot. I think you can start probably both these defenses and pick up stream a decent option. I really don't like. I'm low this week on the Patriots players. I'm just I know overall Stevenson and Harris, I like them like season wise. In this game, I'm not a huge fan. I think if you have some other options, I would probably kind of do more of a flex play for either one if you have them. Myers is also in the same boat. Hopefully, you don't have both Stevenson and Myers in the same team. But if
Ooh,
you
yeah.
do, I think you make a decision on one of those and you go with it. But I think this is going to be a really ugly game. I think it's going to be some kind of 13-6 type of thing or something similar where there's not a lot of points scored. It's going to be just ugly smash mouth football. And then I think we can move to the Vikings here in a second, but I think for the Patriots, I don't see a lot of fantasy points being scored this week for the Patriots.
Yeah, I kind of agree, and I think that's the way the Patriots want to play is they want to establish defense first, slow the pace of the game down, and make the offense, the opposing offense, uncomfortable to where they,
Mm-hmm.
um, they don't want to play it basically. And I think the
Mm-hmm.
Vikings have a lot to prove in this game. Where we said it the week before when the Vikings played the Bills, well, they have a lot to prove, and they kind of got lucky with the win in Buffalo. It was an exciting game there, but then fall flat on their face against Dallas, who is also competing for a high playoff spot as well. Um, so now it's really another true test of what's this Vikings team? Is it the one that, hey, they can play well, they can put up points with the best of them, or is it one that succumbs to pressure and kind of folds? Cousins is
Mm-hmm.
in for probably a lower week this week because it's a team that um, they get pressure and they know how to scheme to be able to take away wide receivers. They know how to take away options on the offense. Now, you're still starting Jefferson. Like, that's not a question, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Mm-hmm.
But we saw the scary floor for Justin Jefferson the last week of very few fantasy points there. So
Mm-hmm.
that means either Thielen is a flex option as a flyer, or Hawkinson as a tight end because he's been utilized in this offense since he got traded from the Lions. So he's not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily a bad option against the Patriots here. And I'm looking at tight ends real quick. Patriots, as this will load. Um, Patriots against tight ends, they give up about 7 targets a game to the tight end position, and they're giving about 44 yards to it. So it's kind of low. but it's not the worst opportunity wise if you look at Hawkinson
Mm-hmm.
for Minnesota.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you there, and I think if you have Hawkinson, you're probably starting him because if you don't have Mark Andrews or Travis Kelsey, you're starting anything that has two legs at this point, especially too with all the injuries and shifting around that's happened with the tight end position. So I think you definitely start Hawkinson, Jefferson, and Cook. I think Cousins, like you mentioned, if you're in a super flex league, two tight end league, you're probably starting Cousins. I don't love Cousins against the Patriots, especially after what the Dallas defense did to him. But at the same time, he has shown a little more upside than previous years, so I think you can start him and expect kind of a lower ceiling, kind of lower floor game of maybe 15 to 20 fantasy points.
Yeah. So we'll kind of run down these games a little bit faster here because I don't want to take up a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
But so Sunday, starting with the 12 o'clock games, the Bucks and Browns play. On the Browns side, this is the last game for Jacoby Brissett. He's a streamer, but with everybody there, he's probably more 2 QB play. You don't have to ask the question about, am I starting Chubb? Because even against a tough matchup, you start Chubb. Hunt's more the question of start sit. And if he's a start, he's probably a flex only. Um, and against this pass defense, though, I like both Cooper. I like Njoku that is back for tight end. Then I also would go back to Donovan Peoples-Jones on the Browns side, as we alluded to earlier. We're talking about the Browns, where DPJ has been efficient with his targets. Cooper, if Tampa Bay decides to play press man, he doesn't do quite as well. So that actually opens up the field, I feel like, for Donovan Peoples-Jones. Thoughts on the Brown side, real quick?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that you start your studs at this point. You don't get super crazy. I think Don Peoples Jones is kind of the flyer slash flex play if you need something. I think you personally sit Kareem Hunt. Bucks have done decently well versus the run, and for the most part this season. So I think Nick Chubb's kind of like bulletproof with he's kind of a matchup proof. Honestly, he'll
Sure.
he'll do well, but I think if you're flexing Kareem Hunt, you're low on options, honestly, for your flex, and so I think that you hit the nail on the head with all those picks.
On the Buck side, there's really not a whole lot as far as questions. There are a couple here, though, because if you have Brady, you're going to start Brady. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin's, those are obvious starts of, we don't necessarily need the question of, are we doing that? To me, Cade Otton, if you look at his name, it's C. Otton, so it's Cotton. The tight end fabric of our lives is the streamer du jour for Tampa Bay. Um, the main question comes with the backfield of, if you have Leonard Fournette or Rashad White, or if you have both, which one are you starting? Because Cleveland has the worst or second to worst run defense against the running back position. So
Mm-hmm.
with that in mind, knowing that the last game we saw from the Bucks, Fournette injured his hip. Now he's not been labeled. I don't think we've had injury designation yet this week. But then Rashad White has increased his role each week, and he's been getting more efficient. So, that in mind, if you had to take a stab and say, I'm going to start one or the other, are you going to take Fournette or are you going to take White?
If I have to start one or the other, I'm doing White. I'm going to start White. If I'm in a situation like we mentioned on a team where you have Fournette and you drafted him as your RB1, RB2, then you're kind of hope and pray get the touchdown. But Fournette's had a history last couple of years of if he's injured, he'll play 2 or 3 snaps and then he'll kind of sit the game. He's done that. He's done that a few times. So to me, I'm probably going White, not looking back if I've got both players.
I actually agree with that because I get really concerned, seeing especially a hip injury with the running back, because this is such a good matchup on paper, with Cleveland being so bad against the run, where White's been proving himself week in, week out for the last about 3 or 4 weeks, where he's been getting more opportunities. The the numbers on paper are showing us that opportunities is increasing. His role is increasing. He's also been a more efficient runner than Fournette has been too over those last few weeks. So I would agree with that, and I would say White still as well. And if you have Fournette and you don't have White, well, one, shame on you for not going and picking him up earlier. But two, I mean, like you said, if you have Fournette and you don't have a better option at this point in time, I mean, you're hoping for a touchdown. So if you have the choice, let's say you have this on your team, this hypothetical situation, you have Fournette and you have Ramondre Stevenson on your team. Who are you starting out of those two?
Oh boy. Probably Stevenson. Honestly, I think Fournette's role is going to shrink, and I know Arians was, we saw this last year a little bit when he gets frustrated running back or they don't perform well. The Tampa Bay staff has a tendency to do that. Arians obviously out now, but I could see Fournette just kind of taking a back row. And I think too is people are going to look at the 32nd ranked rush defense with Cleveland, salivate, start both, but personally, I think you start Stevenson. That's just my thoughts.
No, I actually agree because I think this is kind of where we see White supplant Fournette. It's kind of not being talked about a whole lot, but I kind of see this is where it's going to happen. So the takeover is on its way in Tampa Bay.
Yes.
So
for sure.
Next up is Bengals and Titans. So this is Cincy's a 1.5 point favorite, and this is a 42.5 point game total. So Bengals side, I mean, Burrow's obviously a starter. T. Higgins. Now we've heard rumors of Jamar Chase might be back for this one, but I think if he's back, he's rushing a little too much. So I'd still hesitate using Chase, despite how good he is. But Higgins is there. My main concern actually with the Bengals side, Tennessee has a pass funnel defense where they're pretty low, or they're very bad against the pass. However, they also have a very stout defense as far as the front seven go. So they can get and create havoc on an offensive line. We've seen the Bengals have a very bad offensive line. So outside of, let's say, T. Higgins, would you start anybody else with the hope that Burrow is somehow able to make some magic happen still with this game, knowing what Tennessee's able to do on that front line?
Yeah, I think honestly, I think you start Higgins with confidence. Tyler Boyd is a flyer flex in terms of, I think you go out there and hope that there's some kind of 60-yard crazy throw that Burrow's done the last few weeks to other receivers, to a Mixon, right, where he's just thrown these, or P Ryan. So I think that's it. And I think you have to watch the running back situation with Mixon and P Ryan. I think this is an opportunity for. It'll be interesting to see after how P Ryan performs this week, if he's kind of given a little more of the reins with Mixon still trying to come back from his injury. If Mixon plays a full game, if he's on a snap count, it'll be interesting to kind of see going forward, because the Bengals need a running game to help relieve pressure from Burrow.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is going to be a tough game to do that because Titans have a very good run defense. I think they're top 2 or 3 against running backs in the NFL. So on the Titans side, you're going to start Derrick Henry. Like, there's not a matchup that you're saying I'm not starting Derrick Henry. Where it comes interesting, so Ryan Tannehill, it's a low pass volume offense. And the Bengals, I mean, they're kind of average against the position for quarterback. Treylon Burks is starting to come on as far as what he's doing. We talked about him a little bit earlier in the podcast. And then you still have guys like Robert Woods, Nick Westbrook-Akine still there. Then you got the slew of tight ends. I think Austin Hooper, and then Chiga Konkwo as well, who's good for about 2 catches and about 50 yards as well. But Do you, outside of maybe Treylon Burks, do you start any of the pass catchers with some sort of confidence? Do you go back to Robert Woods? Do you kind of shy away? This is not saying this is outside Treylon Burks, so I'd say he's
Yeah.
probably a little bit more safer.
Yeah, I would say no. I don't think there's any other viable pass catchers. I think it's Burks or nothing, and Burks is honestly like a flex play.
Right. Okay. So kind of a thought I had, and so I'm gonna take a team. So it's Ryan Tannehill. Would you play
Mm-hmm.
him? So Tannehill not having a tough matchup, but also being more run heavy in an offense. And the pass catchers may not be quite as there, but the situation, as far as the game situation, is not as bad. Would you play Tannehill or would you play, let's say, Jared Goff, where Goff has, I think, a better offense, but the situation is a lot worse where playing Buffalo is a tougher defense
Mm-hmm.
if you had to stream one of those
I
two?
do agree. Yeah, if I had to stream either one, I'm they're both not ideal, right? I'm not my first pick to do. So what I
Right,
would probably do, I'm looking at who's gonna get garbage. I don't care how the pass yards come, right? I don't care if they come in the first quarter when it's competitive. I
right,
don't care if it comes in the fourth quarter. So to me, I'm probably doing Jared Goff just for the possibility of the Lions are going to have to throw to stay competitive in that game. They're going to have to. I don't
right,
think the Lions can realistically run with Buffalo and keep up with Josh Allen. So, and then if they're behind, maybe Goff does a lot of, who knows, maybe into the second quarter, third, fourth quarter, Goff gets some extra yards. I like the possibility of Goff getting 10 to 15 garbage points versus say Tannehill that I don't know if he has the ability to do that. Like he's had flashes of brilliance when it's been competitive. I don't know if Tennessee gets up or if they're behind, they don't really have the offense to really sustain that. And if they're barely ahead or ahead by 10 points, Derrick Henry's running the ball until the cows come home, right?
sure,
And
right.
he's gonna kill the game that way. So I like Jared Goff in this situation.
Okay, that's a fair answer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's a right answer because I think you said it
Mm-hmm.
best earlier when you just said, well, they're both not ideal. So you're kind of really scraping the
Mm-hmm.
bottom of
Yeah.
streamers there if you're looking at either of those for an option. So, all right, next, Texans and Dolphins. Let's see, a little bit higher scoring total for 46, but Miami's at 13-point total. Um, I think the
Mm-hmm.
Texan side's pretty easy on this one. You're only looking at starting Damian Pierce, and that's about it.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
I don't think you have to look anywhere else. And I
Yep.
know
That's it.
I
Yep.
know we like to talk about
Nope.
like
That's it.
Brandon Cooks or so. Okay, yeah, that's it. That's all. There's no
Yeah.
really
No,
other
that's it.
speculation. So on the Dolphins
Mm-hmm.
side, I mean, the obvious are again, it's Tua, it's Hill, it's Waddle. Like, there's no reason to really question any of those guys. Mike Gesicki could be a tight end streamer as well. But where it gets interesting, the Texans, like the Browns, are right there with the Browns as either last or second to last. They both are fighting for that position against the run. So this is an opportunity. I think you're going to see Jeff Wilson have a little more command of the backfield as well. But then Raheem Mostert's still there. I think Miami traded for Jeff Wilson to kind of lower the usage of Raheem Mostert to keep him healthier, though. So I think there's opportunity to start both Wilson and Mostert out of this game.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you there. I think Houston is game script could be positive for the Dolphins. Tua goes a couple of touchdowns out and head, and then all of a sudden, the Dolphins have to run quite a bit to kill clock, and we've got a game script that's favoring running back. So yeah, I agree with you there. I think you could start both Wilson and Mostert as viable RB2/flex plays.
Okay. Yeah. Very easy game to go to. So next, because we're not going to spend a whole lot on that, but next is the Bears and Jets. And I don't think this is the lowest game total. In fact, I'm actually sure this is not the lowest game total, but it's close. Game total is 39.5, and the Jets are favored by 4.5. So I'm going to caveat this with saying if Fields plays, I would still play
Mhm.
Fields despite being a tougher matchup
Mhm.
this week. Um, and if Fields plays, I like Mooney still. Um, and I'd still stream Komet. If
Mhm.
Fields doesn't play, I'm only looking at David Montgomery as a volume, but it's a very flex volume based on the matchup and how good the Jets are against as a defense.
Mhm. I agree. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it all depends on Fields. I don't think like Komet is. I would say if you're in tight end hell, which most people are, then maybe you're starting him week in week out. But if you have other options, I think you need to look at those if Fields can't play. But you're right. I think it's Montgomery or bust if Fields doesn't play.
Right. On the Jets side, I think Robert Sala came out and did not commit to Zach Wilson long term for the year,
Mhm.
which
Mhm.
I think helps the offense. Um, that doesn't
Mhm.
mean Zach Wilson won't start this week, so we don't know this. Either way, it's Zach Wilson, it's Mike White, or it's the aged Joe Flacco.
Mhm.
So those are all. Now, Flacco did well with the team early on. They were one of the most pass heavy teams through the first like 3 weeks, which is good to know. But Chicago's not a scary defense against either the run or the pass. So I think, regardless of who the quarterback is, I'm not looking at the quarterback for this week because I don't want to play that guessing game. Um,
Mhm.
but outside of that, I think both Michael Carter and James Robinson are viable because the Bears are not a good defense. They've traded away their best players on defense. Other than that, I'm potentially as a flex play saying Garrett Wilson, but that's kind of my limit on the Jets right now offensively.
Mhm. Yeah, I think Garrett Wilson for me personally is a flex, and I'm kind of obviously probably even lower on the other guys than you are. I don't really care who the quarterback is. I'm just not high on the Jets right now. If it's Zach Wilson, it's gonna be bad. Flacco has been he's had some 300 yard games this year, but again, him coming in, not being named the starter, there's some confusion. Maybe first team reps weren't taken by a certain quarterback. I'm not really high on a lot of the Jets playmakers this week.
Yeah. Even though I think this is one of those on paper, it looks like a decent matchup, but reality football, I think, is a
Mm-hmm.
little bit different for this one to where it's kind of ugly. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't
Definitely.
disagree with that at all. So, next is Falcons and Commanders. So this is a 42-point game total with Washington as a 4-point favorite. The Falcons lost Kyle Pitts to injury reserve, probably done for the year with I think it was an MCL tear. The
Mm-hmm.
interesting thing for the Falcons was on their pass catchers, they were funneled to Drake London and Kyle Pitts. That was it. So you had very nice options of, oh, I can look at London or Pitts. That's who my pass catchers are. Pitts is now out, and I don't think there's a tight end I'm comfortable enough to say on the Falcons to say I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
just replace Kyle Pitts with. So for me, I'm really low on Mariota this week. He does have some rushing upside, but Washington is a better defense as of late. So I'm not excited about Mariota, even streaming him. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I could see London having a decent game. The only other person I'm looking at is Cordell Patterson, but again, being a tougher matchup, it's that flex play because we don't have any teams on bye. So there's not really a time of, oh, well, this guy should just get the opportunity so that he's fine. Kind of
Mm-hmm.
down. I don't like the Washington matchup.
No. Mm-mm. No, I think I don't really. I'm not a big fan of any Falcons players in this matchup. I think Washington's playing good. They're playing on fire. They're playing with some fire. Like I mean, Heineke's doing well. He's moving the ball. I think you like Robinson is taking more of the shares from the Washington backfield. I
Yeah.
like him in this game a lot. I think Washington kind of has like a really gritty 7 to 10 point lead, and Robinson kind of takes over the carries from Gibson, slowly kind of taking away more of that share. You start McLaurin, right? You start a little good old Scary Terry if you have him.
Yep.
I like him with Heineke. He's has a lot of upside with Wentz no longer being the starter. Um, but that's me. I don't really see this game is I think going to be decently ugly. Either going to be decently ugly or Washington's going to blow them out. I feel like there's not I don't really see an avenue for Atlanta doing well in this game.
I mean, Atlanta's been, I'll give them a little credit. They've been kind of scrappy, but I think
Yeah,
they're
that's
kind
true.
of that's the scrappy teams because like the Texans, Houston's also been one of those scrappy teams this year where they've given some teams fits. So I think they could early on give them some fits, but I do think the defense is a lot better for on the Washington side. And I agree.
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting McLaurin and maybe streaming Logan Thomas just because if you're streaming tight ends and it's a really just a dumpster fire, so why not stream Logan Thomas? Why not just try
Yep.
it?
Yep.
And then Heineke is worth a shot if you really need. I actually prefer him over Mariota just because the matchup right there. So
Mm-hmm.
that's about all. So
Mm-hmm.
the
Yep.
next
I
game
agree.
should be pretty simple because this is the lowest of the game totals for the week, and it's at 35. It's the Broncos and Panthers, and of
Yeah.
all the things, Denver's actually rated at as a 2.5 point favorite. On the Broncos side, I'm going to go out on a bold call here, though. Latavius Murray is the only guy you want to look at starting. Everybody else can be on the bench.
I think that's a good play. I'm Cortland Sutton's disappointed this season. You're obviously not starting Russell Wilson unless you have your whole entire team on IR. And yeah, I mean, I think you are Latavius Murray or bust if you're a Broncos fan, or Broncos. Maybe you are a Broncos fan, but if you have those players, I think you spend your fab on Latavius Murray in a couple hours here and hope and pray that he can start for your team. And yeah, I'm kind of low on Broncos players anyways this year. That's a
Right.
whole other discussion, but that's the only thing I see viable in this matchup.
I'd say the only really viable ones, if you're really in a pinch, Russell Wilson, yes, but even him, like
Mm-hmm.
you might be able to find somebody else that's a better potential matchup. And Cortland Sutton's very disappointing, and the Panthers are very good defense. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
not excited about any of them. On the Panthers side, I'm really not excited about any of the guys for the Panthers, whether it's I think they just came out and said that they're going to have a new quarterback, and I'm blanking on the name, but it's not going to be Mayfield. It's not PJ Walker. Um, so you're putting a new guy as quarterback. That lowers DJ Moore. I like DJ Moore, but against this defense, I don't like. Um, Foreman's not the guy. Honestly,
Mm-hmm.
Chuba Hubbard's going to be the guy going forward that I actually like more in the backfield, but I'm sitting Foreman. I'm not. I like Terrace Marshall, but I think he's too fringy
Mm-hmm.
against this defense. So I'm honestly staying away from the Panthers this game. So
Yeah, and I think especially too with Sam Darnold being quarterback this week, I just think that it's not going to go well. I think with the
right.
playmakers, it's his first start this season, come back from injury and stuff like that. I just think it's not going to go well.
So the next game is going to be more exciting, but every other game is more exciting than that one. Um, that game is going to be the Jets Patriots from last week of 3-3. And it's going to be wow, that's bad. So you start the
Mm-hmm.
defenses in that game. There's your play. You start the defenses. Um, so next is Ravens and Jaguars. Ravens are a 4 point favorite with the total as a 43.5. This isn't though the Ravens team that has that defense of, oh well, it's the Ravens. We've got to watch out for that defense. They're getting better, but this isn't what we're used to in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So on the Jaguar side, do you like Lawrence more as a streamer than, let's say, a Goff? Would you like Lawrence a little
Mm.
bit better?
Good question. I Lawrence has had really good games this year. He's had also very bad games. I think with ETN rushing, I do like Lawrence. I do like him in this game, actually. I think that he's got a little dual threat running in him, and with ETN, if I choose between Goff and Lawrence, I'm probably doing Goff just because I think like you mentioned, Baltimore's defense is good. I don't think it's no longer elite. They've shown some holes, and I think that Lawrence can pick up some fantasy points. That's what matters, right? I'm not sure
Right.
how well of a game he plays in terms of real fantasy perspective, but I
Sure.
think that he's able to pick up some yards and kind of save your team for the day.
Yeah, I think you can stream Lawrence. He's probably in that well of Goff and everything, but he's right in that
Mm-hmm.
window. You're playing Travis Etienne because he's that dual threat of he has the backfield rush share. He also catches passes, so he has the opportunity of, we saw the down. I think we saw his floor game when they played against Kansas City, where you're looking at about 10 points, so that's his floor. But his ceiling is
Mm-hmm.
same as like Tony Pollard. The ceiling is RB1 overall potential. Like he has the potential to break the week. And as
Mm-hmm.
much as I like I would still, you're rolling out Christian Kirk and even rolling out Evan Ingram, because Evan Ingram's a very fantastic tight end. If you picked him up off the waiver wire this year, he's serviced well. The guy that I would question is, and I like this guy as a player. He is targeted as much, if not more so, sometimes with Christian Kirk. He just hasn't had the production as well. And that would be Zay Jones. I'm not sure about starting him this week. That'd be a pretty fringy flex option. And that's a really deep league if you're playing him.
Mm-hmm. I think it's like a 14 league flex play is what I would think you put Zay Jones in right now.
Right. Yeah, I think Zay Jones is kind of a hold where he has the opportunity, but this is just you have to pick and choose
Mm-hmm.
those spots for him, and this necessarily isn't really one of
Mm-hmm.
those. Ravens side, Lamar Jackson's kind of come down to earth a little bit, but I mean, you're not sitting him because even if you have a different option, it's not necessarily a better one. Um, where this kind of gets interesting is you have to pay attention to the health of Gus Edwards. If his hamstring's healthy, I would play Gus Edwards. If not, Kenyon Drake has been a very good back for this team. So it's between those two. Um, Mark Andrews came back last week, and so there's really not a controversy of tight end anymore there. If he's healthy, you're playing Mark Andrews.
Mm-hmm.
Where it comes in is this is a low pass volume offense where I think I read the stat they have 852 receiving yards on the year as a team. That's pretty
Wow.
low.
Yeah, that's really low.
The one guy
Wow.
I would actually say it's potential off the waiver wire, and I'm not really high on this player as a whole, but I think could step into that lead role for them. He had 9 targets last week and he had over 100 yards. And it's not Devin Duvernay. He's kind of a gadget play, but the guy I would look at potentially picking up and maybe if you need a guy to flex is Demarcus Robinson. That could be the guy that gets
Yeah.
that
Mm-hmm.
production there with um, just go grab that number one role for them. So, but that would be the play I think on Baltimore side. Okay. Chargers and Cardinals. And this is a higher point total, so it's at 47.5, with the Chargers are a 4.5 point favorite. I think the biggest question on the Chargers side is if Mike Williams is healthy or not. Because if
Mm-hmm.
that high ankle sprain, he could not be healthy and not be full 100%.
Mm-hmm. I think if you're the
Um,
Chargers, you're probably starting what? Like you're starting Herbert, Eckler, Allen, right? And I don't see DeAndre Carter. I don't really see a place for him now that Allen's back. I think
right.
that he's gonna probably be on your bench, and I would keep him as more of like a receiver handcuff for
Yep.
Allen. Who knows? Maybe Allen sneezes on the sideline. He's out for 2 more games. Who knows? So, there's that. I think with the Cardinals, I think, of course, Zach Ertz is out for the year. So, really, I mean, you could, I think Hopkins is the only really viable option with the Cardinals, especially with Kyler Murray being injured. And who knows when he comes back with hamstring, how fast he
Right.
can go. Can he make the cuts that he did before? Is he the rushing threat that he was? I don't know. James Conner, again, I don't know. I think if Colt McCoy plays, I think James Conner's a good play because he's going to hand the ball off a lot. But if Kyler Murray plays, I don't like James Conner.
Yeah. So I like James Conner. I think his floor is
Mm-hmm.
lower if Kyler Murray plays, just because the Chargers are a bad run defense. But I think this is also going back
Yes.
to you can take this Chargers teams in about 4 game sets, and I think they're getting better. So I don't think they're as bad as what overall the season says. I think they're getting better. So I agree. I think volume is there for James Conner. He's there. The Cardinal side, it's really dependent on if Kyler Murray plays or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Hopkins, I don't know if he got injured in Monday night's game or not, but he played. He played well. If it's Colt McCoy or if it's Trace McSorley, it's Hopkins and that's it. If it's Murray, Marquise Brown comes back. Um, I'm willing to sit Brown on his first game back, but the reports were he was close to coming back from Monday night's game. So I'm more willing to say potentially there's that potential. With Kyler Murray out, if he doesn't play, I don't like the ceiling for Marquise Brown because he's not that number one wide
Mm-hmm.
receiver. Rondell
Mm-hmm.
Moore
I agree.
is hurt, so that potentially leads to Greg Dortch. But if it's Murray, I like Hopkins and Brown. And then on the Charger side, I think you hit everything. The only caveat I would say if Mike Williams does not play, the pivot is to go back to Josh Palmer. Um, that would be the only
Josh
pivot is
Palmer, yeah,
say, yeah.
good, good idea.
So let's see. We have the fun Raiders and Seahawks game next. Again, this is a 47.5 total with the Seattle Seahawks favored by 3.5 points. Um, I think the Raiders are very straightforward. You can stream against the Seahawks. So Foster Moreau, as far as the tight end streams go, Foster Moreau is interesting with Waller on IR. You can play Carr, and you can play Adams, and you can play Jacobs. And that's about all you're interested in for the Raiders. Did I miss anybody on them?
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. I don't. Renfro hasn't been a big threat, and the Raiders. Yeah, I mean, Carlson has been solid for a kicker, but that's
Right?
that's about it. Other than other Raiders players, that's about it. Yep.
On Seattle side, so the Raiders are either the worst or the second worst, and by that I mean best matchup for quarterbacks. Um, so Geno Smith is a very viable option again, and honestly, I would play Geno Smith over guys like Goff, Tannehill, Lawrence, just because of the matchup right there. Which then you also have to
Mm-hmm.
like if they're healthy, you like Metcalf and Lockett. Um, with the
Yes.
pivot, if either of those are not healthy, over to Marquise Goodwin. Um, and then the running back that, I mean, you don't have to really question it. You're starting Kenneth Walker. He's been amazing
Mm-hmm.
this year, so you're really starting him.
Yeah, I think in this game, Seattle gets up to a good lead, and I think the game script B is very Seattle friendly, which I think Geno they're very good against, or it's a good matchup for Geno, but I think that they kind of jump out early and I like Walker in this matchup a lot, and I think that he's going to
Right.
do well.
Yep, I like that. All right, we got 4 games left here. We're getting through this. Saints 49ers. So the Saints need to change a quarterback. I'll just say that. This is a real football
Yes.
take here, but fantasy implications. The Saints need to change their quarterback, and I am all for taking the tight end that causes chaos for fantasy football and just saying Taysom Hill is the quarterback that plays tight end, or the tight end that plays quarterback, whatever you want to say it. I'd be all for that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I think that if you're a Saints fan personally, or if you're a fantasy football lover, you're begging Saints ownership and leadership to make a change. Taysom Hill is, like I said, he's ESPN had issues with in the past about how to code him as a quarterback or tight end, but I think as long as he's coded as a tight end and you can start a quarterback in your tight end slot, you do that, especially
Right?
if you don't have Kelsey or Andrews. So that's a very viable play. You're starting Kamara, right? Obviously, especially with
Yep.
Ingram out, there's nothing behind him. And then I think you do Chris Olave is the viable receiver, and I think that's about it for the Saints.
Yeah, I'd agree. And honestly, like the more NFL play is going to be to switch from Andy Dalton to Jameis Winston, but we don't know the health of Jameis Winston. So, yeah, I think you hit it for the Saints. On the Niners side, the nice thing about the Niners is they have playmakers everywhere. The frustrating piece about fantasy
Mm-hmm.
is you're starting each of those playmakers knowing that they could get their production relegated to a different playmaker. So you can play
Mm-hmm.
Jimmy Garoppolo because he has the weapons. You're playing Christian McCaffrey because that's not a question. Brandon Ayuk and Debo Samuel are the 2 receivers you can play, and you're obviously playing George Kittle because you're
Yep.
not in a tight end hell. You actually have a decent tight end. Again, the frustrating part is you just know that their fantasy points are there. It's just whether or not they go to your particular player that you roster and play or
Mm-hmm.
not.
And I will say, I think between the Debo Samuel Ayuk argument, Ayuk has actually been more stable and consistent with a
Right,
higher floor than Samuel. Samuel's had some games where he's scored 15 to 20 points, and like I think last night he scored, last night he scored 19, I think, in half
right,
point PPR. So he did great, but Ayuk has been more stable. He's been the slot guy that Garoppolo has needed. I think Debo gets unfortunately a lot of coverage, being kind of more of the Hardman type of jet
right.
sweep utility guy, and I think with Christian McCaffrey, it's a little less focus of the offense on Debo. So I think I do. If you have both, man, it's tough. Are you starting both? I don't know. I would probably lean Ayuk if you had to choose between the two, but that's tough. San Francisco has a lot of. I mean, I think they have the most. As we're going through this list, I think they have actually probably the most legitimate startable fantasy options of any football team this year.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think so. Ayuk leads the team in receiving yards. So he's obviously been, like you
Mm-hmm.
said, he's been more consistent. I agree with that. Debo also has that higher ceiling where Ayuk has a higher floor.
Mm-hmm.
Debo has a higher ceiling. So you're really hoping for that boom. I think McCaffrey may hurt that a little bit, but again, we're not saying don't start him. It's
Mm-hmm.
you're starting him just knowing, well, they may go out and have a down week just because it wasn't their week.
Mm-hmm.
Ayuk had 2 balls last night, or I think it was 2 catches, and they both went for touchdowns. So it produced, but those 2 catches could have also been 20 yards where everybody else is having a great day as well. So it's just that risk,
Exactly.
but you like the consistency and you like the ability that they all have. So let's see. Next game, Rams and Chiefs. This game looked a lot better at the beginning of the season than it does now. So uh, This is a 44-point game total, and the Kansas City Chiefs are a 14.5-point favorite on this game. That's going
This
to be
game's gonna be
ugly.
brutal. I mean, just yeah, from both real football and from fantasy, I don't I don't see any viable playmakers with the Rams. Stafford is probably like I need to check and see what his status is, but I don't think he's clear concussion protocol yet for Sunday.
Well, this is
And
this is his second in 2 weeks, so I
yeah,
don't think he clears it
yeah,
enough.
yeah, and so then he's gonna get the Tua treatment, which is probably means he's gonna be out for a few weeks. So I think that I don't like anybody. I mean, obviously Cooper Kupp before was the guy, and now with him out, I don't. I legitimately, if you're the Rams, you can't. I don't think you can, in good conscience, start any, especially in a away game. I don't think you can start any Rams player for fantasy this week. It's just not good.
I think it's not a good week, but I think the only one I'm potentially starting is Tyler Higbee, and that's a volume only
Oh yeah,
on
if you're
that
if
one.
you're in the tight end desperation mode, then yeah, like maybe what's the quarterback's name? The backup for the Rams.
Backup, yeah. Hold on, let me look that up. I don't have
Yeah,
his
but
name memorized.
while you look that up, I'm just going to mention that the backup is probably going to be throwing a lot of short passes. So you're right, Higby could be gotten a little like a lot of the 5 to 7 yard kind of tight end dump passes. Um, but and he might have like a 5 of 7 for 55 yards type of line.
Yeah,
I don't know.
the backup is Bryce
It's
Perkins.
gonna be Yeah, Bryce Perkins. So I just don't see this going well for the Rams. Uh, I think I think if you've got a Kansas City player, um, I think you start him. If it's any kind of
The,
receiver, any kind of, I think the
yeah, I think this is a spot to stream a lot of
good.
them. I think the question is, you watch Juju's health. If Juju's out, you
Mm-hmm.
pivot to either Sky Moore or Justin Watson. Sky Moore probably more on the if Kadarius Toney is out, because his was a hamstring, and I mean you hope they're all healthy, but again, Pat Mahomes has made all of his receivers look good every game,
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's Pacheco. You can honestly even play McKinnon because he has that third down role. He has the pass catching role. There's no question about Kelsey Mahomes. But yeah, I think if you have him, you're playing him. This is a good game to play MVS. He might get the Ramsey coverage, but he may not. They may put Ramsey over on Kelsey to try to take away that option. So,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, this is definitely a Kansas City game. Um, and every time we say that, watch, it's going to be pandemonium, and the Rams are going to make it close. It's going to be a 7-point game at the end of it. So who knows what'll happen, but I think
Probably.
I think Kansas City has too much firepower, especially if it's a backup quarterback. I don't like
Mm-hmm.
that option as for a quarterback, you know, going up
Nope.
against Kansas City. Their defense is getting better, so I think it's pretty straightforward for them.
Mm-hmm.
So Packers and Eagles. It's a 46.5 game point total. Philadelphia is a 7-point game favorite this game. The interesting part about the Packers, they are one of the top 3 defenses against the quarterback position. So they have the opportunity to disrupt Jalen Hurts. And we've seen Jalen Hurts struggle they lost to Washington, which we've just commented that their defense is on the rise. They struggle against Indianapolis, who is also a top 5 defense against that position. So this is the opportunity. I'm not saying sit Jalen Hurts, but I think this is an opportunity to see if he has that weakness again against a good defense. Are they put in
Mm-hmm.
that situation again?
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. I think that if you've got Jalen Hurts, you're going to fire him up. I think you have to temper expectations. I don't think he's going to run for 80 yards like he has in other games. I think though he becomes kind of more of like a mid-tier QB1 instead of a surefire QB1 in this
Sure.
matchup.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pass funnel offense where Dallas Goedert's out, which that kind of hurts, but you then are starting up either AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, potentially both, because you're not rushing both of them on your team. AJ Brown has a higher ceiling, but Devonta Smith could have that just breakout game where he just takes more of the targets, especially closer to the line of scrimmage if he doesn't run those big routes. AJ Brown has that ability, yards after the catch as well. I think in the backfield, it's Miles Sanders. That's about it. I mean, Kenny Gainwell might come in, but you're talking game script there, and I'm not going to just say the Eagles are going to come out and just have a 14-point lead and rely on the backup running back for this game.
Yeah, I think I like Miles Sanders, and if it does get to a situation where Hurts can kind of put some pressure on Green Bay and create some turnovers, then yeah, I can see Sanders getting some good fantasy usage here.
Right. On the Packers side, I mean, we touched on it. I like Christian Watson, but I don't see his production staying the way it has been for the past 2 games against Dallas and then against Tennessee. Philadelphia's a lot better defense. Rodgers likes to play a slow pace of play. I think, honestly, the only confidence start I have on this, and it's not really confident, but the only confidence start I have is Aaron Jones out of the backfield. Because I think Lazard is a flex play, but he's volume dependent. Watson's coming on, but can he continue that production in a tougher matchup? Tunyon, Robert Tunyon can be a flag or can be a streamer for tight end, but that's 3/4 of the league there. So, and you're sitting AJ Dillon because AJ Dillon's not been himself.
I agree.
So, last game of the week, Steelers and Colts. This should be an interesting one, right? Yeah. It's a 39 points. So, yeah, fun total with Indy actually as a 2.5-point favorite. And we almost saw Jeff Saturday go 2-0 as a head coach. So, within 1 point of becoming 2-0.
It almost became a case of the Sundays where we have Jeff Sunday going 2-0, but instead he lost a very close matchup to the Eagles. Played the Eagles great. I think for this matchup, since it's at Indy, it's inside. This is gonna kind of be a bit of a brawler, honestly. I think you're gonna have a lot of rushing attacks. It's gonna be a quick 3-hour on the dot game. I don't really see. I think you start Freiermuth, right, as a tight end for your Pittsburgh, and obviously you're starting Najee Harris because you feel guilty because you spent draft capital on him, right? I don't know. I'm not sure what you do.
I think it's a decent spot. So Indianapolis. Let me look this up here on my sheet. Indianapolis allows on average 76 yards per game to the running back position, and they're giving up about a half a touchdown a game. So they are, total to the running back position, they're giving up almost 20 points to the running back position. So that doesn't mean Harris is going to get 20 points. His ceiling is going to be a little bit lower potentially. So you're probably looking at about, 13, 14-point game for Harris if you're being realistic. So I think you're starting him because you probably don't have a better option, like you said. But you like Taylor on the other side a lot better that you're starting as well.
Yeah, I think Taylor too. Like he had some rough games, obviously early on. He's kind of picked up some steam. I think playing at home, this is a game where he can kind of pick up some more momentum and kind of carry that to the later games in the season.
I think I like a lot of the Colts more, and that's a really odd thing to say, but especially with Matt Ryan back under center, that helps Michael Pittman, and that also helps Paris Campbell. So I like them. I stay away from the tight end position in Indy because they rotate 2 or 3 guys, and you're guessing. On the Pittsburgh side, you can start Pickett, but like I said before, Indy's a good defense against the quarterback. So that also then lowers like the ceiling for both Pickens and then Deontay Johnson, where I still like them, but I
Yep.
don't feel as confident in them this week.
Yeah, exactly. And I think with Pickett, the issue I have is just him being a new quarterback, trying to get things, just get the flow of the offense, get chemistry together. They make a lot of mistakes, and the mistakes
Yep.
don't have to be interceptions. They can just be overthrows and stuff where I think they can really hurt a lot of the fantasy value for the receivers and kind of cause negative game script in the sense that the fantasy receiver, like from fantasy points perspective, right? Like you're going to get clumps where you're going to hope for clumps in garbage time rather than having this flow of like, okay, I can see my receivers getting points throughout each drive. It's a lot of really short passes, and then all of a sudden you have to hope and pray that the team's behind by 15 points or 20 points or whatever it is at the end of the game, and the quarterback's dumping passes off.
Right. Absolutely. So, well, Grant, you made it through. This is a bit of a long one, but thanks for joining and got through the games for week 12 for this big Thanksgiving week of games. So,
Yeah, no
if
problem. It's good to kind of do the analysis and the waiver wire and everything in between.
yeah, absolutely. Well, long episode this week, and if you made it through, congrats. But hope you have a wonderful holiday, and we will be back next week to discuss the week 12 outcomes and what happened. We will see you then.